Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our workshop. My name is Scarlett, and I use she, they pronouns, and I'm a first year at WashU. And I have a few housekeeping notes before we begin. This is workshop number 28, Circular Economy, a New Approach to Addressing Climate Change. This is a 1-hour workshop, so we will conclude at 11:30 a.m. If you are looking for a different workshop, now is your chance to relocate. Before we begin, I wanted to walk through a few items, both for the people in this room as well as our attendees joining virtually via Zoom, the Whova app. If you are joining us online, please keep your microphone off until ready to ask a question. I'll be monitoring the chat, and there are a few ways to interact during the session on Whova. The Q&A, which is a chance to submit questions to the presenters, and a chat, which is tied to Zoom. There will also be a recording of this workshop made available in the next few days on the Whova app. All of the content from the summit will be available on the app for the next 3 months. Make sure when you're entering a question or remark that you are in the proper area. I'll be monitoring the Q&A and chat sections of the app and help field questions for the speakers. With that, let me introduce today's presenters. We have Patrick Arnold, who is the founder and CEO of 10 Billion Strong. Maurice Mouillet is the president of Mouillet Materials, and Dr. Jess Watson is the executive director of Earth Day 365. It's all yours.
Thank you very much, Scarlett, and welcome. How's everybody doing today? Last workshop of the 3-day conference. So how's energy levels? Yeah. All right. So I'm Patrick. I'm the founder of 10 Billion Strong. We're an international training program for next generation youth leaders. Also a co-founder of Circular STL. I'm not actually originally from St. Louis. I grew up in a small fishing town in Massachusetts, and also lived most of my adult life in California. And I just want to say I'm really honored to be with some really incredible St. Louis environmental leaders. I don't know how I finagled my way onto this panel, but I'm really glad to be here. But we're here today to talk about the circular economy. We're going to discuss why it's great for people and planet in general, and specifically how it can impact positively climate change mitigation and adaptation efforts. So I like to think of myself as an optimist when it comes to environmental issues, which is why I get so excited about the circular economy. It has benefits for reducing waste, saving money, addressing the climate crisis, and a lot of different tangible benefits. So here's the plan for the session today. So I'll talk a little bit about our current economic system, what the circular economy is and why we need it, and then how we can connect it to climate change, and then a homegrown initiative called Circular STL, which we're really proud to share. And then we'll have some case studies with Mouillet Materials and Earth Day 365 and share some of the really exciting local and national action that they're working on. And then finally, we'll end with a roundtable discussion so we get some input and questions from you folks. So as we think about our current economic system, I wanted to highlight the importance of design choices and behavior change as it impacts a lot of the choices that we make. I like to use RARE's behavior change framework for thinking about how human behavior can be changed so that we can make more thoughtful decisions about our life. And these design choices really impact everything from human impact, but also environmental impact as well. And a lot of these systems are from choices that were maybe made generations ago, or sometimes even in decades ago, where we rarely question them, but all of these systems are part of our everyday life. And I'll share a lighthearted example of how I've used this in my own life. So a couple weeks ago, I sat down with my 3-year and 6-year-old daughters. They had some cereal that they didn't want to eat because it was too soggy. And so I was thinking about food waste and how to have that conversation with them. So I used the information lever. So I started talking about farmers out in fields growing the grains and then transporting it to factories to package it into the product, and then trucks. And then I looked at them and their eyes glazed over and they were confused. And I was like, I've lost them, actually. My credibility as a father and as an environmentalist was really on the line. And so I pulled another lever. And I took out my wallet And I handed a $1 bill to my youngest daughter, and I said, just throw this in the trash, please. She said, oh, no way. And then what I realized is with all of these choices, we need to pull on the right levers. And so for this one, it was an emotional appeal to something that was clearly valuable. And so it really surprised her. And from that point onward, I got a sense from her that there's a little bit more buy-in for this. And as we think towards moving to a circular economy, we really want to think about design choices and behavior change. But let's get to our economic system and think about how it's structured and perhaps how we want to structure it going forward in the future. So just to get a show of hands, who has some background or context with the circular economy here? Who kind of knows a little bit about it? All right, great. That's fantastic. Who knows how it's connected to climate change? All right, good. Maybe slightly fewer hands, but we still got some great talent in this room. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. So right now, our economy is generally known as the linear economy, right? So we have this process. There's a beginning and there's an end. So we have the take, the make, and the waste. And so we think about the initial commodities that are mined or extracted and then made into finished products, shipped to a consumer, and then usually there's a life cycle end to it. Sometimes this is years, sometimes this is mere moments. And there's a lot of problems with it. Particularly, there's a lot of waste at the end of it. There's also a lot of waste because we keep producing more and more goods. And there's definitely something that we want to change, especially as it pertains to climate change. So this slide shows some of our linear economy challenges. On the left, we've got a copper mine in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I do a lot of work in sub-Saharan Africa, so I know firsthand what some of the challenges are with these extractive components, these extractive mines. They release a lot of toxins in the environment. They require cutting down trees in one of the most important carbon sinks in the world, and they're associated with a lot of labor and human rights abuses. Next in the process, we have factories where maybe we're producing something with that copper, a finished product, but there's a lot of emissions associated with that. And then the products are shipped to the stores and the final consumers. And then from there, at the end of the cycle, this is a picture of an e-waste dump in Ghana where discarded electronics from all over the world are sent to developing countries, some to be mined for scrap metal, sometimes to just leach into water supplies and food supplies. And on the bottom, we can see, and we'll hear a little bit more about this later with Maurice, a coming copper shortage which could derail the energy transition. So we're just really discarding all the things that really could help us address climate change and move to an electrified, low carbon intensive economy. So if we have all these problems, all these challenges with a linear economy, how can a circular economy present solutions to these challenges? So the circular economy is based upon three different core pillars. So it's designing waste out of pollution, keeping products and materials in use for as long as possible, and regenerating natural systems. So designing out waste and pollution is thinking about products and services before they're even created and thinking about a better way to do it so that they can be reused, refurbished, or repaired rather than just discarded at the end of the life cycle. There's lots of great examples of this. So when we think about materials that can be repaired, for example, there's some electronics that we just need to discard right at the end of the life cycle. Maybe it's a little bit obsolete or not as fast, but some new designs for technology can easily be repaired and the component parts can be broken down. And keeping materials and products in use for as long as possible is another exciting way to advance the circular economy. So St. Louis is a well-known beer town, so I'll share a couple of examples. So Urban Chestnut Brewing Company, which is a well-known craft beer brewery here in St. Louis and known as one of the most environmentally friendly and sustainable breweries in the country, uses their spent grain at the end of their brewing process to feed pigs in southern Illinois. This is great because it leaves it out of landfills and it also helps feed those animals, and otherwise we don't have to grow grain to feed them. And so that reduces the consumption, also reduces the production emissions. And then finally, there's a really exciting company called Evergreen, which uses spent grain, again, from breweries, this time from AB InBev at the massive industrial scale, but they're using protein from the barleys to create consumer packaged goods like protein bars or protein milks that can be used to offset a lot of other emissions. So again, we're keeping these products in use for as long as possible and thinking about the next generation of products. And because this is the Midwest, we're really excited about regenerative agriculture, the third pillar of the circular system. And we think about how low carbon intensive farming can help really regenerate the soil and regenerate farms so that we think about lowering the total emissions of our agriculture cycles. We talked a lot about energy use and energy efficiency over the last couple of days, and it really makes sense. When we talk about climate crisis, we're talking about trying to reduce emissions. But 45% of emissions don't come just from the energy that we use to heat our homes or to light our buildings, but it comes from producing the cars, clothes, food, and other products that we use every day. So it's really important that as we think about the energy side of the equation, they're also thinking about the product side of the equation. It's really critical that we think about the design of all this, especially when it comes to climate change. Some of the ways that the circular economy can be complementary to addressing climate change includes helping to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, a lot from reducing the production of goods or keeping them in use for longer and longer. And it can help with the scaling of the clean energy transition, and especially with climate change adaptation as we think about restoring and regenerating our landscapes that really need that regeneration. I wanted to share a little bit about our vision for circular STL. So it's our locally focused answer to some of these linear economy challenges. The type of change that we are really looking for is not possible on the individual scale or with small groups of organizations. We're really taking a whole ecosystem approach to trying to identify and highlight the organizations that are advancing the circular economy in the region, trying to help champion their causes, trying to help build their networks, and help thinking about how we can grow and scale. There's a lot of interesting innovation initiatives here in St. Louis. What we think is that what we would like to see is we would like to try to advance St. Louis as an innovator, nationally and globally as a circular economy leader. We think it's possible because there's definitely a small groundswell, and what we'll hear today is some really interesting initiatives that we think can be grown and scaled. Before I turn it over to Maurice to talk a little bit about what he's doing with advancing material science and the circular economy, I just wanted to highlight and identify a couple of our other circular STL founders who are in the audience today. So I had Teresa right here, and then Anna in the back. All right, over to you, Maurice.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I'm going to walk up a little bit, so I'm not as tall as Patrick, but I'm short, so I might need to walk up. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, good. So my name is Maurice Mouillet. I am the founder and CEO of Humane Materials. I'm trained as an electrical engineer. I've worked in power systems engineering for over a decade, transmission substation engineering specifically. So the power that you have today, some of my designs of that. So for the next 30 years, if the equipment lasts, you're welcome to the good power that you have here in the region. But that said, I am trained as an electrical engineer, but the beginning of my graduate career, I got an opportunity to work on high performance materials. And this was way back in 2008 when really what we had was carbon fiber at the time. We know the properties of carbon-based materials, the electrical properties, the mechanical properties, and the structural properties. But at the time, the funding was really available for the structural part, right? So ballistics, panels, other things. Now the time is available for us to explore the mechanical and the electrical properties, right? So just to give you a little tidbit before I start, it takes about 20 years for a new material to come to market commercialization. And we're just about on the cusp of that for the electrical properties of carbon-based materials. So my presentation today is about conductive nanocarbons, a circular economy approach. So our mission at Huey Materials is to sustainably accelerate the development of sequestered environmental carbon composites for defense and electrified mobility. So electric vehicles are really near and dear to my heart, not just because I'm an engineer, but because of the additional benefits that it provides to society at large. So one of the things we really have to do is create a new muscle, right? By embedding the biomimetic lens to the development of carbon neutral materials. Sorry. And the reason I say that is because nature does a really good job of explaining things to us. And we need to listen to nature more as we develop new materials. We need to incorporate innovative extended supply chain technologies to prevent resource leakage. And I'll get to this a little bit later as to when I say resource, what that actually means. But as my colleague Patrick said, the take, make, waste system, everything is a resource, right? Everything is actually a resource from the beginning to the end and back to the beginning again. And so we need to make sure that there's no leakage in that system. Because right now, we really don't care. There is leakage in the system, and that's fine. And that's not appropriate going forward. We need to deploy workforce solutions that incorporate localization of circular extended supply chains. So circular supply chains are only as robust as the local supply chain, right? I'll say that again. They're only as robust as the local supply chain. Because that local supply chain feeds a regional supply chain that can feed a national supply chain and a global supply chain, right? And here you see a lot of biomass in its green state, and I'll get to the reason why I show that. And here you see some copper wire below that. So in 2018, according to the OECD, oh gosh, it's hard to see that, but municipal recycling was at 32.1%, right? So basically, 1 out of 3 things that you put in your recycling bin is trashed. And I've seen it firsthand with the city of St. Louis. So in a former role that I had, I went on a recycling run with the city of St. Louis waste management team. So I had to wake up at 4:30, get there by 5. We left at 5:30 in the morning. And I saw firsthand how one bin can contaminate a whole pickup, right? And I have seen how that has been pushed aside as waste, right? So I just wanted to mention that stark statistic. In 2019, according to the USGS, the copper recycling rate was at 34%. Aluminum was at 51%. And I'll add another one that's not in there. Lead is at only 76%. And you have to pay a core for a lead battery, and still lead is not recycled at 99.9%. So that just goes to show you how our copper recycling rate is at 34%. That's not sustainable. As Patrick said, right? If you want to meet these clean energy needs of the future, we have to capture more of that. That means over 60% is lost in resources. It's just lost. We don't know where it is. So what do? We do this to the top left, right? We continue to mine more and more, right? And I'm not saying we won't need to mine, right? Because that's just not a pragmatic way to think of things, right? But we cannot mine excessively. As I've said to a number of people over the past few years, we can't turn electrification of buildings and transportation and reducing carbon emissions in our society into the next oil and gas, right? Because we're quickly doing that actually, right? And we cannot do that. In 2018, according to the EPA, 23 million tons of biomass was burned. And that 23 million tons, so I mean, biomass, compromises, is comprised of, human waste, animal waste, dry biomass, wet biomass. That's actually dry biomass, right? So when you think of your leaves and your wood chippings and other things, 23 million tons were put into landfills. That's 23 million tons of material that could be transformed into something with a higher value that can reduce carbon emissions over its lifespan. And I'll get to that in a minute. But we must rapidly accelerate innovative decarbonization solutions to restrain the impact of 1.5 degrees Celsius. And we're not on track for that. Nobody is. We're not, the EU is not, China is not, Africa is not, Asia is not. No one is. And as I said, excessive mining of critical minerals and the lack of circular recycling capacity are unsolved challenges. So, what's the opportunity that we have? Because it's a vast opportunity. We need to increase the recovery of metals, such as copper and aluminum, by 20% in the next 5 years, right? And the reason I say 20%, I mean, that's an achievable amount, so between 4 and 5% year over year, right? But those are some of the things that we need to do. We need to do a better job of characterizing carbonaceous feedstocks with high potential. So what that means is basically carbon-based materials, right? And so that can either mean biomass, which is essentially stored carbon, or it could mean CO2, which is carbon as well. It needs to be split from the oxygen, right? We need to investigate the technical feasibility of producing high purity nanocarbon materials from environmental CO2, right? That's what I was talking about. You can create nanocarbons from CO2 itself because it's carbon attached with two oxygen. And so if we increase this by 22% in 2030 from a 2022 baseline, that creates a huge opportunity for one of the key industries that need to be a partner in this, and that is a waste management industry. So year over year, their revenue is only between 1 to 1.5%. So essentially they have no growth. They're almost in a recessional type growth area, right? So they're looking for opportunities to increase their growth, increase their revenues, and get into new products and services. So one of the things a number of our waste management companies nationally are doing are getting into polymer recycling, right? They want to, I mean, they do it already, but they are aggressively getting into polymer recycling, right? Because they see that as an opportunity to increase that recycling rate, of course, from 32%, in their case, probably to 45% in the next 10 years. But what we aim to do at Muye Materials is to say, let's take biomass, which is basically stored carbon, right? So we already have that carbon stored, right? And let's combine it with copper, that is really the perfect electrical conductor, and make metal, non-metal composites that are electrically conductive. And it's been done. It's possible. The challenge, though, is to do it at high yield, high purity, and at cost. And what this does is, so for example, an electric vehicle, right? I'll just give you a quick example. An electric vehicle has about 186 pounds of copper. So who here is about 186 pounds? There you go. I'm over, so I'm not going to say that. I'm over.
That's like exactly what I weigh.
That's exactly what you, okay. So imagine now, an electric vehicle has to carry that copper and use energy to also carry that, right? Even though it powers that vehicle. Imagine if you could reduce that by 32%, right? So you can go from 186 pounds to about 140 pounds. And then you extend it to other parts of the car, whether it's panels, other things, right? The housing of the motor, right? That doesn't need to be conductive, but you can make it with carbon composites, right? So what I'm trying to say is, this is a way for us through Muye Materials to be able to create new materials that require less energy to provide services to us. So what are we doing? Reducing the energy intensity. We know we need products and services and materials to do that, but let's reduce the energy intensity needed to perform that function. And that's, every car is supposed to last about 20 years in service life, right? Well, 15 to 20 years, right? Nobody keeps cars that long anymore. But the thing is, what I'm trying to say is, these products are being serviced for at least 15 to 20 years. So that means over that lifetime, as we increase renewables into the grid, right? And net zero production of energy into the grid, right? That means we're using less energy to do that work. And that means we can spread that energy a lot further. And that's the goal. So target markets: aerospace, Department of Defense, consumer electronics, EVs, and electric vehicle supply equipment are a number of applications for the target markets that we're looking towards. And so one thing I do want to add to this discussion is, how do you actually capture those materials, right? Why is it not being done, right? So I had a really good conversation with the USGS, US Geological Survey, right? And they do a commodity report every year. Not many people look at it. Because when I emailed the guy, he's like, wow, you're actually going to talk about it. He was surprised. It's just one of those government reports that they put out and nobody reads, right? But when we talked, he's told me something very important, right? He's like, even though I could provide this information to you, I can't get all the information I need here in the US. And actually, we couldn't talk the date I wanted to talk because he was at a conference in Europe trying to discussing with his colleagues in Europe, in the EU, how do we get better information to understand what these materials actually are, right? And so one of the things he told me was, we need better traceability and tracking. We don't do a good job of that. Everything is essentially voluntary, right? And so that's why recycling is the way that it is, right? It's voluntary, right? So we need to be able to trace the material in aggregate from its source to the end of its life and back again, right? So in the circular economy, right, you have these four groups, right, that are extremely important, right? The producers, the consumers, right? So who produces it, who consumes it, but also the people that scavenge it and the people that decompose it, right? And at Moving Materials, we want to be part of that connection between those four groups, because that's what the circular economy is about. So the integration of blockchain and smart contract technology is a solution that we're working on to make that possible. Reducing the carbon intensity of materials through reverse logistics is essentially saying, when the material is here at the end of its life, we know a way to bring it back, to get it back into the supply chain, to make that product. So a number of the solutions that we have, circular services, right? So modeling smart contracts for material traceability. So smart contracts are executable independent of anyone's input. It's an agreement between two parties, or two or more parties, right? But it executes by itself. So it holds both entities accountable at all times. And both entities are liquid in that agreement. So if I renegotiate on that agreement without going back to that contract, I lose my liquidity. And so does the other entity, whether it's one or two or whatever. Increased secondary market tracking of copper and aluminum. Right now, we don't do a good job of tracking copper and aluminum in the market. Advanced utilization of environmental carbon and nanocarbon production, as we talked about earlier. And then I like to talk about the solution that we have here called CIRCLE, right? It stands for Conductive Integrated Renewable Conductors for Life Cycle Energy, right? So what I'm saying is, we are making sure that the energy that is produced by our products is circular in fashion. So high purity, low cost, high yield, specific electroalignment in the matrix composite. So the challenging part is copper does not like anything else with it if it's not a metal. And nanocarbons do not like anything else with it if it's not a nanocarbon, right? But it can be put together in a composite. But the challenge is high purity, low cost, proper alignment, which in turn produces high yield, right? Optimize the metal grain boundary for conduction. So I'll be brief on that, but every metal has a grain boundary. Think of oats. Put oats together and you make oatmeal. That's what essentially a metal matrix is, right? And so our goal is to manufacture cables, connectors, and thermostructural components. So here I wanted to show essentially what the traction is, right? So here you see 2022, 2030, 2040, right? And so the carbon nanotube market, as far as US billions per year, right now in 2022 is about I think it's like 1.5 billion, right? By 2030, it'll be about 15. By 2040, it's about $85 billion worldwide. And that's for very small product. I mean, it's at the nanoscale. Nanoscale products, right? Copper. And this is for EVs, thousands of metric tons of what we're going to need. This is just what we need, right? So here we have about, I think about 8 metric tons. Look at 2030. Look how much that jumps, right? We're talking about I think it's about 155,000 metric tons of copper that's going to be necessary. Can we mine all of that in Chile, Peru? You said Tanzania, right?
Yep.
Tanzania, right? Can we mine all of this copper? That's probably not a good idea. Because look at 2040. 420,000 metric tons of copper is going to be necessary. And that's just for electric vehicles. The largest consumer of copper in the world is in buildings. So what I'm saying here is that as we electrify transportation, we're essentially trying to match that. The largest consumer is like a building like what we stay in, which we're in right now. Graphite, which graphite is used on the anode side for batteries. Look at the need for graphite over the years. It's exponential. And what is graphite? Does anybody know what graphite is?
Carbon.
Carbon. In what form? Soft, hard, medium, what? Generally.
Hard. Soft.
Generally soft. Right? Generally soft. Right? Coal is harder, but graphite, generally soft. And that's soft, and you can't squeeze it necessarily, but it's certainly not in the compactness of coal. Right? And then aerospace DoD, their use for carbon composites in US billions per year is right now really low. It's about $1 to $2 billion, right? But look, by 2030, that's about $25 billion according to the US Department of Defense. So the market opportunity for carbonaceous materials and metals for the sustainable economy are accelerating year over year. That's what I wanted to show you here, right? How it's accelerating at a rapid pace. And so this is myself, of course. We're developing novel metal, not metal, conductive lightweight materials for high impact industries. And here's my contact information. That's my cell phone, my email, website, and you can find me at, that's T-Rex, essentially. I'm on the 4th floor, but that's my mailing address. And you can find me there as well. And thank you for having me today. And I'll pass it to my colleague, Dr. Jess Watson.
Thank you, Maurice, for that fascinating dive into one aspect of the circular economy. I am going to talk about another angle. I'm going to talk about movement building within the circular economy. So we at Earth Day 365, we're kind of perfectly placed to do movement building around circular economy principles. We really see ourselves as a convener of the environmental movement. We work in collaboration always with all of our programs, and we really try to center equity and expand the regional environmental movement to include new communities and centering equity. We were founded 20 years ago. We've been working on the St. Louis Earth Day Festival for longer than that, about 30 years. We are a leader in zero waste and in the circular economy locally. And as I said before, we really try to center equity in the environment in all of our programs. Our signature programs are the St. Louis Earth Day Festival that I've mentioned before, and then Recycling on the Go, which offers zero waste consultations and services for large-scale events. The Green Dining Alliance, which is a sustainability certification program for restaurants. We have about 100 restaurants in there. And then 2 new programs that relate to the circular economy that I'll be touching on today. Our Environmental Justice Days of Action program that we've been doing for the last 2 years. And then our Too Good to Waste regional messaging campaign on food waste. So I'm really bringing a perspective of how do we bring the circular economy to the ground to make the argument to people, okay, this is important in my life. This is how I make behavioral changes. This is why. So let's talk about the festival. This is the largest Earth Day festival in the Midwest. And this year, the theme is Go Circular. So we have lots of applications for how we can bring the circular economy into both across the environmental movement and also make the case to the people attending. So it gets to be on the actual Earth Day this year in Forest Park, April 22nd and 23rd. It's a place where we have everybody in the full spectrum of the environmental movement. Everybody from somebody who's selling cloth napkins to somebody who is selling solar panels to all of the environmental nonprofits in the region. And so it's a time for them to really talk to one another and think about the direction that we want to take the movement. It's also really well attended. We have upwards of 20,000 attendees, sometimes way more, depending on the weather. So how are we applying the circular economy to the festival this year in keeping with the theme? First of all, I want to really emphasize that we've figured out how to do a really large-scale festival with a really high diversion rate. We have a 93% diversion rate from the landfill, and we do that by working with each vendor individually and emphasizing we don't want you to be giving away things that are single use. We're not going to do disposables in this festival, and we work with our food vendors particularly to make sure that happens. We also instituted the Sustainability Awards last year, which were really well received, and they're a way to really lift up superstars within the environmental movement that are doing really amazing work. This photo is of Jean Ponzi receiving the Hellbender Award for Lifetime Environmental Achievement last year. And we have a Green Business Award, and this year we're renaming the award as the Circularity in Business Award. We have several folks that are on the award committee here in the audience, including Maurice, Anna, maybe there are others. And so if any of you have a business or an organization that incorporates circularity principles into your operations, you can self-nominate. You can definitely put the nomination in. It opened yesterday. And if you know of another one that you think should be up on that podium, please tell them to get the nomination in. We also are having something that I'm really excited about. It's one of the first repair demo fairs, cafes that has been happening. I think there's been one before that's done by Perennial. They're running this repair demo, and they're kind of scaling it up for the festival. They are a nonprofit that does creative reuse. And so they'll have artisans and experts that will be able to offer programming on how to repair your electronics, how to repair your toaster, how to do visible mending for your clothing, how to upcycle waste or recycling. It's really fun stuff. And we have a major focus on sustainable fashion within our green marketplace as well. So trying to target the fast fashion aspect, which is bringing tons of, it's incredibly problematic for the environment. So we'll be highlighting some of those sustainable fashion vendors in our fashion show on Sunday. And then we'll have a major electric vehicle focus this year, Maurice. So we are very grateful that WashU will be providing electric shuttles for the first time from the parking lots to the festival. We also have an electric taxi from the metro station. And then our top sponsor, Subaru, is introducing an electric car, the Solterra, that will be on site. And the Gateway Electric Vehicle Association always brings tons of fun cars that they have added to and made into electric vehicles. So those, along with a lot of other renewable energy and electrification vendors, will be a really great focus within the circularity theme. And then I want to talk about another aspect of circularity in a different program that we've been doing since 2020, actually. So it's Environmental Justice Days of Action. And this is a program that's in response to some of the breakdowns in the problems that we see from that linear economy model that Patrick outlined earlier. And so who is disproportionately impacted by that model? In the St. Louis region, it's always Black and brown communities first. So in this program, we partner with communities that are dealing with environmental justice issues, particularly illegal dumping. And they're already working on the topic within their neighborhood. They invite us in and target exactly what they'd like to work on. We're able to bring in resources such as dumpsters, tools, vehicles, sometimes heavy equipment, lots of volunteers, and the whole structure for managing volunteers safely. And we've had 22 of these events over the last two years that have taken 24,000 pounds off the streets of North City, North County, and then some neighborhoods in South City that have high rates of illegal dumping. We have a Marine Villa cleanup that's happening on April 1st. So we have partners all around the region. These are just some of our longtime partners. And really over the last 2 years, the focus has been on building relationships, building trust, returning multiple times to the same neighborhood, making sure that it's clear that this is not just a fly-in, fly-out situation. This is not a photo op. We want to work to support other programs that we can work in partnership on. So we've been writing grants together, and we're trying to work towards larger policy solutions. And then the last program that I want to talk about that relates to circular economy is how do we convince the broader public that maybe hasn't had much exposure at all to these issues that they're important and they warrant behavioral change. So this is a regional food waste messaging campaign called Too Good to Waste, and it's supported by the St. Louis Jefferson County Solid Waste Management District. It's been ongoing for 18 months now, over 18 months now, and so why food waste? Obviously, we already touched on that earlier, and many of you are very aware, but this is one of the biggest impacts, especially on climate change. It's a driver of climate change, and especially at the household level, it's one of the ways that individuals can really do something to lower their impact on climate change. So 125 to 160 billion pounds are wasted each year, and that doesn't just represent the pounds of food itself. And we have to think about all of the inputs that went into creating that one apple that are also having climate impacts. And so if we take it down to the local level and look at the last time we broke down what was going into St. Louis municipal solid waste in 2018, organic waste actually comprised the largest category at 24%. So if we are able to focus on this locally, we could really make a big impact. And of course, we know that in landfills, that organic waste creates methane, which is so much worse than, it's 25 times the climate impact of carbon dioxide. So Project Drawdown has identified this as one of the top solutions that they promote in addressing climate change. Because globally, food waste comprises 8 to 10% of emissions. So this is really a top solution that we want to figure out how to tackle at the local level. And so in order to make this argument, we decided to focus on the economics of it. Most people who are hearing about food waste might not think it's such a big issue. They might not understand why it's a problem, and it might even be climate skeptics. So we're not arguing from the impact on climate, we're arguing from the impact on the wallet to try to get that behavioral change. So we're using the stat, $1,300 a year is what the average American consumer throws away in their food waste. So we developed an ad campaign that translates that stat into all the other things that they could be spending that $1,300 a year on, whether that's first row field box seats at a Cardinals game, or lots of different, tacos at Mission Taco, or the possibilities are endless. So we've got these up on billboards, Metro Transit ads, all sorts of print ads, social media. We're at farmers markets. We have a food waste day at an elementary school on Friday, where we're measuring the amount of food waste that's coming out of lunchtime. And so in the first 18 months, we achieved 11,000 impressions, which is far above our goal on this one. And the next steps really are trying to work with the NRDC to quantify this into how much is this resulting in actual food waste diversion from the landfill? So I wanted to end with a few ways that you can get involved in circular economy movement building or making individual changes in your life. You could volunteer, attend, or sponsor or have a booth at the Earth Day Festival. Come out to one of our environmental justice days of action. You can join Earth Day 365 as a member, or if you are an organization that has circular principles within the work that you do, whether it's a business or a nonprofit, then we invite you to talk to us about joining Circular SDL as a member. So now I think we're going to transition over to some questions, and I'd like to invite Jenny Wentz to come up to moderate. And Jenny is a bit of a single-use plastic warrior herself, and currently works with the Mississippi Rivers Cities and Townships Initiative.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we will open it up for questions from you all, and I don't know if there are any questions in the chat, and then I will hand it over to you. I do want to make one comment about the recycling. I think you're referring to like the alley dumpsters, recycling dumpsters in the alleys in the city?
No, this was curbside.
In the city of St. Louis?
Yeah.
Okay, it's the solid waste management is only as good as the staff that run the program. And I know cities like Brentwood and Kirkwood and University City have their own staff and their own solid waste. It's really important to make sure the folks know what needs to go, because they're really good about sorting those materials out, making that choice. Okay. That's it. Okay, go.
So we have a question online saying, is there a way to recover useful materials that are already in landfills?
Someone want to take it? Maurice? Is it on?
Yes. Yes, there's a way to do it. It's essentially a form of urban mining, right? So what I was talking about is essentially a form of urban mining. This would be a little bit more complicated, mining a landfill. Yes, it is possible. Unfortunately, it's not cost effective, because what happens is every day a truck tips in a landfill, it is covered over with fresh soil, right? So essentially you have layers upon layers of waste soil, right? And so that would be extremely difficult. I will say, though, that I do think in the future, though, that probably will be necessary, but it'll be more mechanized and automated than someone digging through, even with a mechanized piece of equipment.
All right, anything else?
Two more. What can be done to incentivize more recycling by both businesses and individuals?
I could speak to that one.
Well, we've actually been working with the city of St. Louis, both Jenny and I, on trying to transition away from dumpster recycling into individual bins, which really is much more helpful in increasing both the rates of recycling and the quality of that recycling. People can actually see the amount that of waste that they're generating and recycling that they're generating, and they're not discouraged by someone else maybe contaminating an entire dumpster, as Maurice was talking about. So I think that's one way to increase rates. But Jenny, you might have some other suggestions.
Yeah, I think with businesses, it's tough because the cost of recycling, well, the cost of solid waste management, but there are a lot of ways. And I know even with the Green Dining Alliance, like for example, in University City Loop, we connected businesses together so that they could really start a joint recycling program. And I think the city of Maplewood did that a really great job. So then the cost is shared. There's also ways, with single source or single sorted, what is it called? Where you just have a bin for glass. And so that material can be sold directly from a giant dumpster to we have a glass recycler here in St. Louis. Same with aluminum, same with those. So when you sort those materials, then they're worth so much more. So that's a really great way to minimize the cost of the businesses for a single stream dumpster service, collection, hauling to just sorted material. That's my suggestion for keeping it economical for businesses. I don't know if that answered it. Is that it? Right there? Okay, does anyone? All right. I'm bringing you, do you want to run? Okay. I knew you'd have a question.
My question is for Jess in the food waste initiative. What are you suggesting people to do to reduce their food waste?
Thank you for asking, Dana. There's a lot of great suggestions that we have on our website, and we have materials produced, but a lot of it is really educating yourself about expiration dates, planning your meals ahead of time, using your freezer for things that are about to go bad or for leftovers that you're not able to eat in time, and then composting. That's not ideal. You want to start from the beginning and don't overbuy. But if you do end up having food waste, composting is better than getting it in the landfill.
Can I add on to that? One of the things that I was pretty surprised when I moved to the St. Louis area after living in Northern California for a lot of years is that we don't have municipal composting. So inevitably there's going to be some food waste, some organic material like apple cores or things like that. So even if you do the best thing possible, but there's a lot of interesting, some cities offer it, but if they don't, there's a lot of interesting private companies that offer this as a service for a relatively modest cost. And one of the things that we think about for circular STL or just where entrepreneurship and innovation can solve this challenge is just public-private partnerships. And so I would say, if you have the means, try to support those local businesses that are doing a great job taking, some of even the necessary scraps and moving it into a better place than just throwing it in the main landfill.
All right, Krista?
My question is for Elise. Can you talk about how the end of life will work? Like you were taking two materials and melding them together, and so that's part of the trick of the circular economy. Like a pallet card shirt, that works, And so that's just my question: like how when cars, getting scrapped, how can that be recycled into the next?
Yeah. It's a very good question. You can actually separate back out the nanocarbon material and the metal, right? So you can separate those back out. You cannot easily combine them again. You'd have to go through some further purification. But yes, you can separate them, right? So the nanocarbons are extremely resilient in terms of heat. They transfer heat extremely well. And they do it even at the melting point, still can do that even at the melting point of copper, right? So what I'm trying to say is you can actually melt the copper down, right? And you can extract the carbon-based materials that are there and have pure copper and carbon-based materials again. Now to put them back, you would have to go through a process to put them back together again. So essentially it could be recycled, right? It can be recycled again and perform again and again and again.
All right. Question?
Maybe to piggyback off of that a little bit, curious your thoughts on how you're thinking about circularity holistically. And I really appreciated the comments about how environmental justice fits into circularity. I think through our work as a socially responsible investor, we often find that when we talk about circularity with companies, it gets siloed, where they really are looking just at the climate impacts. They're not also thinking about what are the social impacts, whether it's environmental justice, human rights, the inputs as well that go into creating a circular economy. So, for instance, perhaps the presence of toxic chemicals in post-consumer recycled content. So that's maybe the first question, is just sort of what are your thoughts on how you take a more holistic approach that breaks down some of those silos? And then second, any thoughts on extended producer responsibility programs and the role that those can play?
Jenny, do you want to talk about extended producer responsibility?
Yeah, I'll start with extended producer responsibility. So I guess you all know what that is, extended producer responsibility. It's basically just, it's putting the onus at the end of the life of the product on the manufacturer. So if you make a product, you don't just make it and you're like, great, I can sell it forever. You have to say, okay, but at the end of its life, it's going to be turned into this. How am I going to manage that waste at the end? So it's that producer's responsibility all the way to the end, not just when they take their money and go. And then, because what I found just working for a municipality, even with CFL bulbs, like tons of manufacturers came out, they're like, we can make all these bulbs, and then they went away, and then the municipalities and the taxpayers are stuck collecting these materials to keep them out of landfills and contaminating, and so it's put back on the backs of the taxpayer. Drives me insane, obviously. So a lot of countries have extended producer responsibility, and we have some states, California and Maine. Don't know if there are any others. It's really hard here in the Midwest when we have things like a plastic bag ban that not only can we not put responsibility on, but we are just not even allowed to put a fee on a plastic bag. But I think that one way to do it is to go straight to the manufacturers, and I personally avoid the policy because we're in Missouri, and go to the manufacturers and say, okay, you have these goals that you have set yourself. You have said that you're going to add recycled content to you have said you're going to reduce this. You have said, how are you going to do that? We will work with you. I'm not here to like blame and shame, but what I want to do is work with you to figure out how we can work together, and you can help support what we need to do, because instead of the taxpayer doing it. That's about that. The environmental justice part, I know for the work we are doing in St. Louis and the work I do in Baton Rouge and Greenville, Mississippi, and other areas, the big piece is just that collaboration, pulling people in at the beginning. And I mean, I've never been in a community with people of color that have been like, no, I don't care. The communities like that seem the most like, oh my gosh, of course we want to do something. What do we need to do? And they just lack, a lot of times they just lack resources. And so business, NGOs and organizations have to really build that trust and that empowerment so that folks feel like they have that ownership. And they have the power to do it, because there's always that missing trust piece. But there's probably more. Here you go, Jeff.
I also think it's really important to include environmental justice voices within the circular economy discussion, especially as we have so much federal funding that's coming down right now, which does include circular economy language in it. It's something that they're flagging. There's money come from the EPA and through several other areas. I think it's important to figure out how we can partner with communities so that we can get them in and translate the work that they're already doing into circular economy principles to make sure that it gets funded in this tranche that's coming down. Often there are ways to connect. We're talking about, like in North St. Louis, I mentioned the vacancy rates in relation to the environmental justice days of action and increased rates of illegal dumping. Well, there are groups that are basically recycling buildings there, and how do we link them into the circular economy discussion and make sure they're getting funded for the work that they're doing, which is clearly in the same vein, but there's often kind of a translation issue. Because we don't talk about the circular economy as much, especially here locally in St. Louis. It's much more of a buzzword nationally. Did you have something you wanted to say?
All right, we have time time for, I'll walk away so I'm already here. Here you go. One or two.
So first of all, thanks so much for this presentation. It's really helpful. I think a lot of us are curious about, in the whole, if you will, industry or opportunity of circular economy, what are currently the acupuncture points? Where are the emerging breakthroughs? Or where can we in other communities, what have you learned here that would inform us if we can invest our energy in one area to get more change, what might that be?
Thank you for that. I just want to throw out a couple things. So, to your question a little bit earlier, the economic opportunity for the circular economy over the next 2 decades is about $5 trillion. So anyone in business should pay attention to that for one thing, right? And I could give you the source for that if you need after. To your question, sir, we are the second largest market for the second largest waste hauler in the country, our region, right? On the Missouri side and the Illinois side. So what does that mean? We have one of the largest opportunities to accomplish what Patrick, Jess, and I are talking about, right? So if you want to put it in statistics, we're number 4 at least, right? Second largest waste hauler, second largest market in the country. That is the hugest opportunity I could think of for a place like the St. Louis region. So I can give you, that information if you need as well, but that just showcases the opportunity that exists and the opportunity that we can seize and do better for our communities in which we live, work, and play. So.
Well, may I add on to that? For example, what about tires, plastics? I mean, for example, there's carbon in tires. What of all that flow that's going currently to the landfill is the ripest for intervention, transformation, as a pilot for showing the whole world the power of circular economies?
It's carbon-based materials. I'm sorry. It's carbon-based materials, right? Whether it's organic or whether it's non-organic, right? The majority of our waste actually is essentially plastics and biomass. That's really what it is, right? There are metals as well, but metals are more easy to capture because their value is already determined by a market, right? But the value for amorphous carbon, which is like a plastic bottle, for example, is not captured very well, right? So I'll stop there to let my colleagues answer.
Yeah, I think that spurring innovation locally so that we can get more of these industries started to recycle some of these niche items that you're talking about is something that could be where some funding and energy could go locally. But I think in terms of impact on climate, food waste is really where I would put my energy and where we are starting to try to put our energy more as an organization. I think it's an easy win. I think it can be explained to people, and there are clear changes that can be made both at the individual and at the restaurant, grocery store. You can move up the chain, and you can also really usually achieve cost-saving goals with it as well. And I think that has to be a part of this conversation, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about the circular economy discussion, is because often you can build in those cost savings as well. So I'll leave that there.
Yeah, let me just underscore the food waste component, just because, so my organization, 10 Billion Strong, we're really oriented towards 2050 or 2060 when there's 3 or 2 billion more people, and we think about all the food that they're likely to need. And so food waste is sort of this triple win. So we avoid land use changes, so like cutting down forests for more croplands. So it's like, that's like a net carbon benefit. Second is all that production, the transportation, the fertilizers, everything that's sort of number 2. And then third is that methane component, right? That Jess was talking about in the presentation. Every time you add food waste to the landfill, you increase the methane, and it's so much more potent than regular CO2. And so if you can address that, you can address a whole host of positive climate benefits.
Just one other thing. I was surprised that Maurice didn't mention creating more of an infrastructure for electric vehicles and getting that more common in the area the way that it is in other parts of the country. I think that would be a huge win for boosting the circular economy locally. And the other piece that I would mention is reusables. That you see that in other cities. people creating systems for washing and reusing to containers or other types of containers, and seeing that kind of cracking that egg, cracking that nut here is something that I'd like to see as well, and something that we've been working on at our campus.
Okay, we're a little bit over. I will, can we take one more question? Do we need to cut it?
I would maybe cut it and then afterwards if people have questions.
Okay, so we'll wrap it up. I will just say one thing. The most important thing to do is to reduce the use. And that's something like with the circular economy and all the economy and everything's about the economy. Nobody says it enough. How about we just reduce the use of all the crap we use every day?
Consume less.
Yeah, consume less.
I just want to say thank you again to our speakers, everyone here today, and everyone joining remotely. Our closing panel begins at 11:45 a.m. in the Emerson Auditorium. Thank you again.
If anyone wants to ask any questions, Gail, did you have something you want to talk to? Or you want to just walk
I just wanted to make a statement about regenerating.
Can you? Please. Please do.
Go ahead, Gail.
Go ahead, yeah.
Mike, it's yours.
The regenerating nature in circular economy kind of helps you think about materials. In nature, materials are dispersed, and in our world that we live in, when plastic is dispersed, it doesn't break down. But in nature, all materials break down. So we need to think about substituting like packaging in the short term. Looking at substituting and designing packaging that breaks down, and we also need to think about designing out materials that don't break down.
Thank you, Gail.
Thank you, Gail. Gail is one of our local EPA administrators, so she has a good perspective on this.
We're not an administrator, but I'm.
She's our regional.
What is the title?
She's our regional EPA leader. That's what I call her, Gail Hubert. Here she is, everyone.
She said she's not an administrator.
She's an administrator? Okay, she's an administrator.
I don't know if the lighting was very good, but I think it was editing.
All right. I appreciate your graphics. Thank you. I saw that you.
It's here, but
Region.
Someone's talking. I had a quick question.